Okay, perfect. Wow, thank you for that introduction. I'm Christine Gadsby. I'm the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer at Blackberry. As you know, one of the things we do is secure communications. We've been doing it for 40 years, and the landscape in communications in the last 2 years has changed probably more than I've seen in the last probably 15. So you have my deck, right? If you can go to the first slide there, I'll get started.
If you click into your screen, you can accept mouse control.
Oh, okay. Click into screen. Okay, let's see. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So that was a little bit about me. I'm going to just cover four things really quickly. The attack value of data in the human supply chain, which is kind of what I've been referring to, the communications piece between human as the human supply chain. The data that's exposed, I've got a real example of someone here in our company that sort of went off and kind of looked at what data they could find on themselves. Fascinating. The tools used to weaponize it, which is something we're not talking a lot about in the industry right now, but we need to talk more about that because it'll tell us a lot about sort of what the threat actors are up to. And then what governments are doing. BlackBerry does a ton of business with governments. We're, in all G7 and 19, I believe, out of 20 of G20. And it is interesting that they're not necessarily all talking to each other, but they're all doing a lot of the same things. So when we get started, Assault Typhoon, we all know about it. But really, what we have to assume now going forward is that all global networks are compromised because, we know this is true. We know threat actors now are persistently sitting in all of our global networks. And the challenge with the global network problem isn't that we don't know what the vulnerabilities are that are being exploited, it's that they're not fixable. It's on ancient infrastructure. In fact, this CISO of AT&T sits, a half a mile down the road from me, and him and I commiserate on this all the time. They know, right? They just can't do anything about it because it's really not fixable. It's just known ancient architecture. It's one of those things when you pull up the hood and your piece of software and you've got really ancient, open source libraries that maybe don't have fixes that are so old it's not supported. It's sort of the same thing in our global networks. Um, and so what does that really mean? It means that, cell towers that can be stood up to eavesdrop is a commonality now. We just have to assume that criminals now know that they can just go stand stuff up and they can just have at your data, at any point in time. And we do know that that's costing human life. There is a lot of talk within the government right now and concerns around the human toll of this, especially in wartime and in war zones. We do know that some of that data has been compromised, used to spy on locations of enemy forces, and then used as weaponry. So it is a big deal. It's a big deal to our governments. It's a big deal nationwide. I was in the Middle East last week, actually, and it's just everybody's topic of conversation is this part right here and how this data is being used. So the data being gathered is really interesting. This is Jonathan up on the right, JJ, we call him. He actually went to WhatsApp and what I'm going to show you has been the data has actually in these exact slides because I took these slides from him. This has been shown to other governments around the world on what JJ could just go and find about himself. So, this is free data. It's in the EULA. If you look at any of these free messaging apps, all of them do this, right? It's how they make money. So you go to the EULA and you can see what they're doing with their data, and we as consumers, I have to tell my kids this too. You click through those permission screens. Who reads you know, the thing? Nobody reads the thing, but they're all saying in there, hey, we're going to collect all this data. We're going to sell it and we're not going to tell you who we're going to sell it to, but they're not exactly really super clear. What I've realized, I think, over the last year and sort of going through some of these agreements and trying to figure out really where the start of that is, they're very vague. And it's really interesting how you can tell that lawyers have manipulated this language so that they can kind of just say, hey, don't look over here. Meanwhile, we're going to do whatever we want and we're going to make money off of it. So again, no secret. But I just want to show you some of the stuff that JJ was able to find about himself. JJ works in Malaysia. JJ lives in Australia. He travels globally. And here on this screen, you can see some interesting information about his Hong Kong data roaming sim that he uses when he's traveling off his non-burner device, but it's also not his work device. So this isn't necessarily a device that he was tossing but it was a device where he'd used to connect to his family on other applications, but not his WhatsApp instance, which you're going to find a little bit fascinating when we go through a little bit of this data. But you can see, we've got IP connection here. We've got addresses. I actually know where this address in Malaysia is. And I know where he was, but I was horrified when I saw this because I realized that I was with him at this address. We all were. And that address part right there is one of the ways that we know nation states are using this data for attackers, because if they know, I'm just going to make up some names, but the nation states are really going like, hey, if we know Bob and we know Jim and we want to know when they're together, they don't have to look at the messages. They can just pull the address. Bob is here at this address. Bob is here at this address. They don't need to know what they're talking about. They can target the IP connection and then target the address. So to me, that's really scary. And then we got all of these blocked numbers that Jonathan had been calling. And so, they could tell actually who had been calling in and who he had been going out. And he highlighted some of these blocked numbers because he found that was interesting. It's one thing, I think, from the data aspect to be able to say, okay, I can see that you've called my mom, but they can see who he didn't want to talk to and who he actually had to block. And if you're doing some social engineering, again, you're a nation state attacker, this is really valuable information to know who they're targeting is the right person, right? Maybe they're not exactly sure. This would give them clues into what they're looking for. And then this is really interesting. This is the list of groups that he's in his WhatsApp chats. This is all open to the public. So, you can see by the data on the screen that, he's in a bunch of different groups. And one of those, he's in the ASEAN 2022 chat from when we were working with the ASEAN region. The CCOE is our security research center in Malaysia. You can see he's got some best Christmas. I mean, he's got some personal stuff in here that's, adopted son for a year because one of his kids is in school and brought, he did a school thing with another student. Anyway, you can see on and on here. You could put a lot of things together and thoughts together in this data. So how are we using that? How are attackers using the data, which is kind of what I find fascinating and what they're actually doing with it. Like, so they get the data. So how are they getting access? What does the attack surface look like? This is an operating system to operating system connection and the interception points which I find fascinating. We wonder why this data is, exploitable. It's exploitable because this is all the holes in the system that they can go after, right? You've got an operating system to a wireless interface. You've got a wireless interface that then goes into this border, and the red dots here and the border gateway is a big deal because it takes time. This lags, right? You're handing off from a geosystem to another geosystem. That takes time. And while it might be a second to an attacker, that's an eternity to be able to intercept that data. So we're really seeing a lot of those attacks happen right where that red line is, right? Between a transmission network, into another operating system where it's crossing and it's handing off between cell base to cell base. You've got that, the hamster, I call the hamster wheels are sort of turning right there. That's where we're seeing a lot of the attack vector happen right there. And this is what governments are worried about. And so what are the tools that they're using? This is the crazy part. And, Rob, this is one of the conversations you and I had. So cell tapping as a service to intercept those points. And by the way, those points, those in the last slide, those are just free and open to the public. Anybody can go stand up a base station and try and tap into those. It's not, they're not necessarily exploiting vulnerabilities. They're doing it as a service. So up in the right-hand corner of this, the SS7 network interconnects is cell tapping as a service. This costs less than a cup of coffee a week to hire a company to tap into those connection points. Not kidding. It's there. You can go research that. And the carrier metadata archives is the bigger concern. So once they get into these carrier points, all that metadata we just showed you, it's all sitting there. They can just have access to all of that because they're selling it. So it's all in these big, sort of trove trials of information. And then the untrusted network equipment, we know it's all compromised. Again, not the network carrier's fault. It's just old technology. And then the injections of spyware into the networks, we know that's happening too. Again, we saw that with Salt Typhoon. So you have in the communication side, this trifecta of things happening, right? You have criminals getting smarter and understanding all of these laggy interception points. You have, carrier networks, ancient old technology that's just full of vulnerabilities to exploit. And then you have criminals now putting that two and two together to be smart enough to either go after people, buy the information that they can give you, or inject spyware into those networks and then compromise a bunch of other machines to do other bad things. So we've got lots of motivation. And so I'll close off with this. How can governments protect themselves? I want to go through just really briefly crazy conversations that Blackberry's happening right now with governments. It's kind of almost a holistic discussion that we're having with governments, and it's going way beyond that first box of protecting conversations and identities. But we're talking about protecting those communications from hostile conditions, right? So cyber attacks, instability, AI deception, which is, we don't have time in this talk, but is a whole nother talk on itself. It's relentlessly forcing and undermining operations. And the challenge just isn't that defense. It's really ensuring that there's resilience and, we can prevent eavesdropping attacks. We can conceal patterns of life, which again, we go back to Warzone. Patterns of life is a big attack surface right now between just, again, who you're talking to. Are they talking to the same person? Do you call this person every day at 5? Are you in this coffee shop connecting to this free, coffee Wi-Fi every day at 5? So securing mobile device use and verifying identities cryptographically, which is something that we're working on right now. And I can tell you governments are just really clamoring on this part right now, is really to make sure that when you pick up your phone and you call Bob, that Susie's picking up on the other side and that you can verify that transmission, that it's end to end and it's not being intercepted, some way along the line like we showed in that graphic. And then secondly, enable rapid and coordinated response in crisis. This is a big deal right now between governments. I think a lot of governments are really realizing that they do all this stuff to, protect and defend, but when crisis does happen, there's delays in communication, which just, opens everything for disruption. So when conditions are hostile, response between people, it must be immediate. And the intelligence that they're sharing between them must be trusted. And the collaboration it just has to be seamless. So we are seeing a lot of governments moving to one of the solutions that we have, which is crisis response between people in secure real-time conditions. It just makes those critical decisions without interference, real-time, trusted. And then the third and the last box on there, and then I'll end my time, is sovereignty, which is really interesting. So we spent all this time trying to get everything into the cloud and somewhere else. We're seeing nations pull that back and look for sovereign control. And so, organizations relying on third-party infrastructure for security are vulnerable kind of by design, and that's what they're seeing kind of come back to that. So that requires, sovereign control over communications, the networks, the centralized security enforcement, and then that is, getting into the compliance part of that highest government standard. And when you bring it back sovereign, the one big thing that we're seeing is that you can control the metadata. So, another one of the solutions we have for communications allows these governments to control their own metadata, right? They're forcing those conversations into applications where they can control who's in the application, who's running the stuff, who's communicating back and forth. And it's not like you can go to an app store and just download a app. We're controlling all of that for them. So there's a lot of, so the biggest thing I think I'm seeing right now is everybody pulling back and saying, wait, hold on, we gave away too much control. We're going to pull back, in order to keep our people safe. And, again, I'm Christine Gadsby. I'm here on LinkedIn. Happy to answer questions. This is my favorite thing to talk about. If you're looking for solutioning or just ideas on how to talk to your executives, just hit me up on LinkedIn and I'm happy to help. That's it for me.